absent any other factors, you're going to be somebody who can have a plan and act on it and not be afraid to do what needs to be done.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Underground Kings podcast. Today, I am joined by my friend and client, Mark. Mark, thank you so much for coming on.
It's great to be here.
So, Mark, tell me a little bit about what it is that you do, a little bit about your business model. So you are a communication coach.
Correct.
Fill in myself as well as the audience a little bit on what exactly that means, what exactly it is that you do, and just a little bit of background and backstory behind the business.
Sure. Basically, it's demystifying communication. So a lot of people struggle to communicate. They don't know how to make a connection with other people, or they don't know what to do when those connections go wrong. And I demystify that by teaching them what I call the science of communication. It's not just an art, there's a science to it as well. And so I use a thing called the Life Languages Profile that helps people to understand what it is that they can do to make a connection with someone who's different from them. And the reason I got into that was because I've always cared about people, and I love to make connections between people. And I found I wasn't successful until I discovered this particular tool that helped me. And because it helped me, I love helping other people with it now as well.
Beautiful. Have you always seen yourself as a strong communicator?
No. If you rewind back to my school days and college days, I was a very poor communicator. Started out very insecure because I didn't know how I was wired and I wasn't comfortable in my own skin. But then moving forward from there, I became kind of overconfident and I communicated just the way I would do and didn't recognize that that was different from a lot of other people. So it's only really in my adult life that I've come to see that I need to be different for different folks and to communicate differently in different settings as well. And as I've learned that, and I've become a lot more comfortable with who I am and the way I'm wired, so that I can teach other people now how they can do the same thing, even though they're different from me.
Let's lean into that insecurity factor in young men. So a lot of young men tends to be, what our audience has built itself up to be. And I think that a lot of young men, including myself, struggle with a period of their life where they are trying to find their identity, if you will. Mm-hmm. They're trying to find themselves within that transition from being a young boy into manhood.
Right.
And I know that struggle for many comes right around that college age. There's a lot of new things going on. What are some of your thoughts about a young boy becoming a man and in the way that he communicates his feelings to others and the importance of him? Like, what are some things that he should be doing in order to take steps in the right direction and to make sure that he is heard?
That's a really good question. I think if I back up a little before I answer that, I think part of the challenge is that our culture and our society doesn't give young men, if you like, the mentoring or the introduction to becoming an adult man. Most of our dads are not skilled in that themselves, and they can't give what they don't have. And so we over the generations, we've lost the art of helping a man become a man because we don't have a model for that. So I think the first thing a young man can do is to figure out who he is, how he's wired, what makes him unique, to be able to get a handle on his own makeup, his own personality, his own preferences, all of that kind of stuff, in order that he then communicates with authenticity. Because authenticity is really the best way to grow into who you're meant to be. If you know how you're wired, you may not like all of it, but if you at least understand it, you can then compensate for the bits you feel are not what you want. You can also emphasize the strengths. And I always prefer to work on emphasizing strengths rather than fixing weaknesses. Yes, there's a place for fixing weaknesses, but unless you build the strengths, you don't stand a chance to fix the weaknesses. So as far as communication goes for young men, they need to understand who they are themselves first. But then they can also transition that into understanding other people the way that they're different. So then it's not threatening that others are different from me. That was my insecurity growing up. I felt so different from all the other guys around me that I didn't understand myself. And my dad didn't have the tools or the experience to be able to help me in that. It wasn't until I got around other people who could help me understand how I was wired and who I am. That was what led me into becoming a man in that kind of way. And that's what I've tried to do for not just my sons, but also my clients since then.
I was right there in the same shoes. I was a very misunderstood young man or boy.
Right.
And it was, I had levels of ambition and, I had a certain level of ambition to me, but the problem was it was angled in so many different pursuits. And it was, at the time I had sports. I found sports and physical activity and working out in the gym, and that was where I was able to exert that ambition. But upon graduating, and then you kind of go into like the college ecosystem, there's a lot of activities that young men are partaking in there that one could be ambitious towards, but they are not necessarily as constructive. And I think for me, I always felt like I was living in a box. Like people were constantly trying to put me in a box, whether it was from a very young age, having, teachers when I was in elementary school making comments to my parents or getting calls home, or even the administration making comments about the fact that maybe I should be checked out and we should be looking at, ADHD medication, all of these different things to put me in a box. And I always asked myself why. And I think my journey in that middle ground of being a boy and becoming a young man, a lot of the dialogue I was having with myself was trying to understand, like you said, who I was at the time. Yep. And who I wanted to be.
Right.
And none of those boxes fit that profile.
Yeah.
And you talk a lot about your process for communication coaching. Mm-hmm. And you talk about the fact that you are not in the business of creating boxes. Yeah. You're in the business of building bridges for people, bridges Absolutely. Of opportunity.
Yeah. Because we've both experienced how painful it can be, but also how limiting it can be when you either other people put you in a box, or even in my case, I put myself in a box. and figured that the smaller I could make that box and the most insignificant I could become, the least painful it would be. But actually that was a complete lie. The more I squeezed myself into this box of insecurity and trying to kind of fade out of society, if you like, that got more and more painful for me, until I realized actually the way I'm wired is actually to get life and energy from connecting with other people. But I didn't have the opportunity to develop that because I didn't understand myself in those early years. The problem with manhood is you don't just grow into it. It has to be shown to you somehow. Ideally by, men around you that know you well enough to be able to draw out of you what's in you, to bring you into the design that you carry, because every man is unique. Every man is different. So some of the stereotypes that we're surrounded by, we either dive into them, like you were saying in the college scene, the stereotype is you do all this stuff and actually a lot of it's unhelpful. Mm-hmm. Or you withdraw from it and you try and duck the stereotype, if you like. And that's not helpful either. That's the path I took. Sports in college for me was a no-go. Sports in high school for me was a complete disaster. Because of the insecurity and because of the box I'd put myself in. So I love to be able to help people see that actually they're not just what they see on the surface. There's a lot more below the surface, and help them to be able to develop some of the aspects of who they are and how they're wired, to be able, like you said, to build bridges with other people, because none of us flourishes when we're isolated. Some of us are more wired to have just a small circle of close friends. Others are wired more to be the life and soul of the party. But either way, we've got to have relationships. We've got to have connections, because otherwise we shrivel up. We wither. We're not made that way. Human beings are relational beings. We get our meaning and our sense of purpose out of our interactions with other people. That's why I find so much value in what I do, because I realize I'm helping people to make more effective connections and to communicate more fruitfully. And therefore, that I'm doing them a favor. I'm helping them become who they're made to be.
I can absolutely see the impact in what it is that you do and the importance of individuals like yourself leading these kinds of conversations that a lot of people aren't having with those around them, let alone with themselves. Mm-hmm. And I find it very interesting, the topic of debate that you brought up about putting oneself in a box. Because we always think about like society and all these external factors are trying to put us in this box and we don't feel like we fit in. But, it's really in those moments where, like, if you just feel like your life isn't going in the direction that you want it, or that you're not living the life that you want to live, or doing the things that you want to do, or around the people that you want to be around, odds are you are putting yourself in that box.
Totally.
It's not society. So you need to, if you need to, withdraw, retreat, think, strategize, make a plan, and then go on the offense in a direction that puts you at least puts you in a position to be taking steps in the right direction.
Right. And I think that the mistake we make when we put ourselves in the box and realize we've done it is to think we can get ourselves out of the box we made for ourselves by ourselves. And it doesn't work that way. The only way I can get out of the box I've made for myself is with the help of other men, of other people. Is I need to find somebody who will help me deconstruct that box and turn the pieces of that box into bridges instead. It doesn't have to be me, but if you've got somebody who knows you well enough and who can help you to really see what the treasure is that's in the box, somebody who sees value in you, that for me was the key to help me begin to step out of that box and begin to form connections.
And it's really a lot about, I can't remember exactly who the quote is by, but it goes something along the lines of, I am not who I think I am. I am who I think you think that I am.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
And it's really talks on a very deep and personal level about one's perception of oneself.
Right.
And the power that can have in the way that you live your everyday life, the way that you do everything.
Yeah.
What clothes you choose to put on in the morning, the way that you choose to dress, how well put together you are, whether you choose to take a shower and put deodorant on that morning right. For some people, just how you carry yourself in a room, how you interact with others. A lot of times is a predisposition that we have waking up that morning on who we think others think that we are.
Right. Yeah. But the trap of that is that typically I don't open that box to let anybody else know. So I'm not going to give you a clue of how I think you think I am. I'm going to keep that hidden. And that's the trap. That's what keeps me boxed. If I can begin to open up and talk with people I trust, I mean, this is not like you go up to somebody in the grocery store right. Or something, when you get in your car, oil change or something, you talk to the mechanic. No, it's got to be somebody who knows you well enough you can trust them, but we all need to find that kind of person. I had a friend one time who said, if you can find someone who'll tell you the truth, you should pay them. Now, of course, he was a counselor, so there was benefit to him when he said that. But it's true. Yeah, if you can find someone you can trust and who'll tell you the truth, that's when you can begin to open up that deep internal box of not just how do I see myself, but how do I think you see me. Both of those things together are key to me becoming who I'm supposed to be and who I'm made to be. Until I can do that, I'm not going to be the Mark that this world needs.
Now, how did you in your younger years, when you said you were very to yourself, very introverted, if you will, how did you break through that initial barrier of saying to yourself, because obviously at some point you came to the realization that you needed people externally in your life to communicate with, to help you to become the person that you are meant to become. And how did you go from being basically this person in this life that you had built by design into I'm going to step out of everything that I know outside of my comfort zone and pursue that. How did that thought process occur? And then how did you actually execute on that in order to take steps in the right direction?
I wish I could say there was a thought process first and then steps of execution. I think to some degree, I stumbled into it. But for me, what it was is when I went to college, I met a group of folks very early on who accepted me for who I was. And in my case, it was the Christian fellowship at the college. Now, I wasn't raised in church or anything, but somebody came up and invited me in basically the early stages, first couple of weeks I'm at college, invited me to go to this group. And as I go into this group, I see a whole bunch of people now who, I think because of their faith, were really comfortable with who they were. They were comfortable in their own skins, and they accepted me as I was. And that led me into settings, church settings, but not traditional church settings, where leaders would actually want to help me become who I'm made to be. And so it was that group of friends around me who accepted me as I was. And I like say it was an accident, really, that I found them. Well, I mean, you could say it was God, but I wasn't planning it. You know, you said, what's the thought process? I'm afraid there really wasn't a thought process other than I've got to get out of this middle-class English box that I've put myself in, you know? Because, again, I didn't really design the box. It kind of grew up around me it was self-protection, really. I kept kind of pulling up these walls around me until I suddenly realized I'd boxed myself in, and now I've got to escape from it. And so there wasn't a process. I know that sucks for anybody who would love to have a process, but actually since then I've discovered there can be a process. So you don't have to wait for this sudden whatever, you know, divine intervention or great accident that brings you into a group of people who you can trust, who accept you as you are. But that's the process you need. You need people who accept you, but you also need people who are a step or two ahead of you, who want to bring out the best in you. So mentors, fathers, leaders, whatever label, coaches, whatever label you want to put on it. And of course, I'm at a stage of life now where I can be that for other younger men. I'm older than I like to remember that I am, but still I care very much about younger men not having to go through the journey I went through. And again, it doesn't have to be exclusively me, but I love to cultivate that. Even when I'm with other men, you know, similar age to me, I'm encouraging them to invest in young men, because you need that kind of someone who wants to pull out of you the best that's in you, someone who will be safe for you, but somebody who will challenge you, which sounds like a contradiction, but actually it's not. You can't challenge somebody if you're not safe with them. You can't be challenged by somebody unless they're safe for you. But that process was what helped me along that journey. As time unfolded, as I graduated, I got in a setting where there were leaders who really wanted to see the best in me. They saw in me more than I could see in me in the early days. But because they did that, then I was able to step into the level of trust and challenge and opportunity that they would open up for me, as well as being able to receive the input from them. You know, I remember on one particular occasion that one leader, this is back in London years ago, but one of my sort of mentors, if you like, said to me, look, I know you're really focused on this course you're taking, but I'm hearing that the girls on the course think that you hate them all because you're just ignoring them all. You know, girls exist, you know, you need to, and it was like, oh yeah. So I was very grateful for that kind of challenge, but also just that awareness for what was going to be best for me. I'm very thankful for the people in my life who've done that.
I think it's very interesting, the point you made about others challenging you. Mm-hmm. Because like you said, it almost seems like it's an opposing thought of, you know, they're someone that's going to encourage you and yet challenge you. Yeah. That's something that I have always held at a very high regard when it comes to the men that I choose to surround myself with. I don't want to be surrounded by other men around approximately my age that are going to always tell me the good news or what I'm doing right. Mm-hmm. What is so critical for me on the path that I am on is to have other men in my life that are going to come to me with the bad news, that are going to come to me and tell me what I might be doing wrong or what I could be doing better. Because for me, I've never been one for pats on the back. I was brought up in a household where, you know, it was, my father was very supportive father, but it was never over the top. Right. There was absolutely no existence of participation trophies. You performed or you didn't. If you performed, you know, it was good job today, on to the next.
Yeah.
And so, you know, for me, I always found so much benefit in that relationship that I had with my father, in that when I failed at something, or when I failed to perform up to my ability or up to my potential, there was no high five or you know, good job waiting for me. You know, there was like, you know, you do better next time. Like you lost that one. Better luck next time. And so, but that gave me the opportunity to learn to take constructive criticism better with time. Like, obviously, as a young boy, you know, it was very much like, oh, you don't know anything, da-da-da. But in reality, it shaped me into the man I am today. Right. Was, you know, receiving that kind of constructive criticism from my father and from other men that have been in my life. And I think it's so important. And the thing I see in it today, in today's society among men, is not necessarily the reluctance to challenge other men in that way, but the hesitation to phrase it in a way that can be understood in the way that it should be understood. So trying to soften your words to, I'm going to get the message across. You know, Mark, this thing you've been doing, you really should be doing it like this, or you really shouldn't be doing that. But instead I might come to you and say, like, maybe you should think about maybe not doing that, as opposed to just saying, like, hey, knock that off, or you should stop doing that. Right. And I think it's, you know, language is such a beautiful thing, and I'm sure we'll delve into that quite deeply with you being a communications coach and all. But language is a beautiful thing. And you see, especially in our culture today, you know, everybody's texting, using these devices, and the formality in the way that we speak, in the way that we write, in the way that we communicate is lacking.
Totally.
It's LOL, how, letter R, you, letter U, you know, we're losing the beauty of the language. And every time, over the years, as we continue to try and make language more simplistic to use, and there's less skill involved in getting maybe a point across, we're dulling the blade.
Yes.
We're dulling that blade, and we're not able to be as sharp with our verbiage. So what are your thoughts about that, as far as where do we see the gravitation of language going in the way that people are communicating, especially on, you know, mobile devices, in their everyday life, the layman's use of language?
I mean, the problem with the connectedness today is that it's anti-communication. Most of the connectedness is broadcasting and not communicating. So I'm putting out my best image of myself on my whatever, TikTok, Instagram, whatever, you know, that's what I'm projecting. And anything that's just text, I don't just mean texting, I mean whatever, you know,
written words,
messages, whatever, DMs, all of that, anything that's only characters and words, you lose 90% of the communication, because as we're doing now, there's a lot of body language, a lot of tone of voice as well in communication. And we lose a lot of that. And what I like about what you were saying, you know, growing up being told the truth, there are two ditches there's a ditch on either side of the highway, if you like. If you're always told that you're a winner and you get participation trophies, you end up in one ditch where you think, you're the greatest thing since sliced bread, and you don't realize that actually you're a jerk. But on the other side, if you're constantly being berated and pulled down, you never achieve the potential you have, because eventually you'll believe that there's nothing good in you. And you've got to avoid both ditches. What you described is actually affirmation in the form of constructive criticism. And that's the vital component, is that we need the affirmation, not of being told that we're wonderful, but of being told the truth. With the heart to it, that I'm not pulling you down, I'm lifting you up. And that's what I heard you say about your dad. And that's what's so missing when we do everything through cell phones and online, because you can't get the personal interaction that provides that middle of the highway. Now we can really go somewhere. And so that's why it's so vital to be able to understand how to give that. And the way you would have received correction as a young man and the way I would have received correction as a young man, we needed correction in different ways because you're wired differently from me. And that's the thing I love to help people with, is to figure out how to give that kind of affirmation in the form of truth to particularly family members or people close to them, close friends, that kind of thing. But also it works in business as well. It works in any relationship. How do I give that affirmation in a way that the other person can really benefit from it? How can they receive that? I'm thinking of a friend of mine, a younger man, who's he's a high mover language. And so he's all about action, and he's all about, well, like you actually. So I just suddenly realized I might be about to describe how I should react to you, but this is somebody else. But when I talk to him, I have to be very direct. And I'm like, you're doing this wrong. And I saw what you did there, and you can do better than that. And in my natural wiring, I don't talk to people like that, because that's not one of my first languages. In fact, the mover language is my lowest language in my life language profile. But I know to be able to speak to him and make a connection with him, I need to speak mover. And so I come in like, you got this right, you got this wrong, you need to change this, you need to stop doing that. This is good, that's bad, that kind of thing. And he loves it. And if he'd done that to me, I'd have gone off and sat in my room for a week licking my wounds, So it's understanding different people. Some people need to be given a thought and left to sit with it for an hour or a week because that's the way they're wired. Other people, they want you just to tell it to them straight so they can get on with it. So figuring that kind of stuff out is what I love to help people with.
And I think that offers a perfect segue for us to start talking about maybe the profile that you brought along today.
Sure.
So this is my life languages profile.
Indeed. Okay. Which is the way that the tool has profiled you according to the way you answer the questions. It's an online questionnaire as you took. And as you answer the questions, what it does is it pulls out which of these 7 languages is strongest in your particular wiring. But you're not just one language, you're 7. So I love to say to people, do you ever feel like you got more than one voice going on in your head? Because we all do, right?
I thought I was schizophrenic or something.
No, exactly. No, you're actually normal. There's the affirmation again. But we're all normal to have more than one voice. The key is, can I figure out which voices I want to listen to in this setting to be most helpful? Because for you, the voices you're hearing the most are the mover and the shaper. They're your top 2 out of the 7. For me, the top 2 I'm hearing is the influencer and the shaper. So we've got some things in common and some things that are very different. For you, your influence is quite low. And so the way I would interact with people, just if I was left to myself and wasn't thinking about other people, wouldn't resonate with you at all. You'd be like, oh, here he is off going, doing his party thing again, and I'm out, But the beauty of the profile is it helps us to see ourselves in a way that gives us the necessary self-awareness to then be able to build bridges with other people. But it also equips us to understand in which ways others are different from me. Because that's the problem with just knowing how I'm wired. If I know you're different, but I don't know how to get a bridge between us, then we can't communicate effectively.
And that's the key factor in what this can do for someone or for a team or for a group of individuals is it gives them the tools to better understand themselves and to better understand others and to be able to create those bridges, as you say, or to be able to better communicate with other people that may not communicate in the same style that they do, that may not act in the same way that they do. And that can show through both in our verbal communication as well as you and I have both talked quite deeply about body language.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. Because it's not just words, there's actions as well. And so each of those 7 languages has a unique profile. When I do a workshop, I talk about it as if they're 7 separate people. You know, you need to learn to recognize them. When you're in a room with people you know, maybe at a party or a family gathering or whatever, somebody laughs in the other room, you can tell who it is if you know who it is. You know, it's like, oh, that's so-and-so's laugh. Or somebody coughs or sneezes, you know who it is just because you're familiar with them. Well, the same with these 7 languages. If we get to know them as 7 unique people, none of us have 100% of any of those 7 inside of us, but we've all got a piece of all of them, and that's where those different voices we talked about come from. So self-awareness is the starting point. Until I understand how I'm wired, I don't know where I've got to build the bridge from. You've got to know your starting point. But then understanding all 7 languages helps me then to recognize, so which language is your preferred language in this interaction or in this setting or in this particular, whatever it is, whether it's at work, because you speak different languages at work than you will with friends or at home or whatever. We all speak all 7, but understanding them at a better level helps us to build those bridges. I call it life languages economics. If you can learn 4 facts about 7 languages, you can be 100% more effective in communication. So 4 times 7 equals 100. I know it doesn't, but it's a little memory thing that I do that helps me recognize, yeah, I need to speak other languages.
I see. Now, going back to my results, which I know I've looked over them once, I don't quite 100% recall. What are some of the highest and the lowest that stand out on that report, and maybe describe a little bit to the audience as well as to myself on what that actually means?
Sure. So in your profile, again, based on the way that you answered the questions when you took it, and that we should say that as well, it's a snapshot of you when you took the profile.
Right.
You could well be different in 6 months' time in the way your profile comes out. Unlikely that your first language would change, particularly as you've got one that stands out above the others, the mover, the one we talked about before, which is all about action. It's all about raising the standard. It's all about pioneering, being courageous, seeing things that need to be fixed, strong value on justice, those kinds of things. These are the people who work in emergency departments or fire departments. You know, they run into burning buildings and rescue people, that kind of stuff. Or they work in settings where they stand up for what needs to be changed, social justice, those kinds of things. So that's the primary one for you, but your other languages may well vary over time according to the season you're in and your life, that kind of stuff. And interestingly, your lowest languages are your feeling languages, the emotive languages. And so, and knowing you a little, I would say, yeah, that fits with how I perceive you. You're not a kind of guy who's run by his feelings. Now, you can have feelings because they're here, but in terms of expressing care for somebody who's in pain or struggling, you'd have to really consciously do that because you know you want to or you ought to, rather than because your heart drives you to. You're not the kind of guy who goes around rescuing kittens, that kind of thing. Which is fine. There's other people who do go around rescuing kittens. In fact, the responder language, which is your lowest in your profile, is one of the highest as a first language in the population. So interestingly, there's a lot of caring people out there. They just don't necessarily know how to express that in ways that other people understand it. So your profile shows that you're likely to interact with life by action and thinking more than by feeling. Not that you don't have feelings, they're still there, but to understand yourself in the way of, this is how I'm moving through life. I'm moving through life with make a difference and have a plan.
Yep.
And provided you know that, then you start to recognize around you there's a lot of people in life who don't interact with other people, with make a difference and have a plan. And how do I then relate to them? Well, first off, I want to recognize what are their primary languages, what's their preferred communication style, what's wiring them to be different, so that I can then begin to adapt to that. Now, there will be times where make a difference and have a plan is what we need. You'll shine in that setting as long as you understand how to bring other people with you. And again, understanding that all the 7 languages helps us with those kinds of things. So I've seen bosses, for example, with their teams, be able to draw out which ones are the most valuable in whatever setting. We've got a crisis among the staff, or somebody's sick. Well, now we need the caring people to come around and do their thing, as well as the action people to step in and get things done. Or if it's more about making connections in the community, well, now we need the people who can read the room and feel how people are feeling, and how do we get people on board? How can we encourage and be enthusiastic? That's a whole different grouping of languages that will be stronger in other members of the team. And so it's helpful to any team leader, whether in a non-profit or in a business, or in some kind of community organization or a church or whatever. If you've got a team of people, to understand how their profiles look, you now know who to draw on in different settings.
That's very interesting. So in reference to this profile, I guess I would pose a thought process or a question that I've had. I have always considered, I certainly have the result to prove so to myself. I certainly see myself as having this innate ability, it seems, over the course of my life to judge people's character very quickly.
Sure.
Very efficiently.
Yeah.
I, in my lifetime, have had many instances where I have proven myself to be correct about a person's character. Mm-hmm. Someone who may enter the friend group as a new acquaintance or someone new, and on both sides of the spectrum, sometimes I'm like, I can trust that. Give me one night with them.
Yep. I
can trust that individual. Mm-hmm. And they seamlessly work their way in. Or a lot of times it has become tough for me within my friend group of other people. That person comes in, they all see them as surface level who they are, like, oh, they're fun, they'll be around, they're this, that. And for me, there's something there, and I'm like, I don't trust them. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it has always seemingly been an innate ability that I had. And like I said, I've proven myself to be correct about certain people time and time again. And I tend to have, when I form relationships, when I form friendships, I have, over the course of my life, been blessed to have had very long-standing friendships.
Yeah.
I have a very small circle, mm-hmm. But when it comes to that circle, these are friends I have had for years. Right. But regardless whether I've been a friend of someone for 5 years, 6 years, 10 years, I can meet someone tomorrow and feel a certain way about them that can lead me to believe they're going to be in that same position in 10 years. I can trust this person.
Right.
And I guess I'm wondering if there's any reflection on the profile pertaining to that.
Totally. Because each of these languages, I talked about the 4 facts about 7 languages. Each language has a filter question. So what you've just described is a perfect example of the mover language, your primary language. Filter question is, what's your motive? And so you're always assessing, do your words and your actions line up? Is this someone I can trust? Do you care about the things that really matter? Those kinds of questions, is anything off balance here? Very much, there's the scales of justice kind of thing, and you can tell if everything's tipped. And you can tell it because the mover language is strong for you. The force is strong with this one. But somebody else who's got the mover language lower might have a difficulty doing that. And so your self-awareness now is, I have this strength to offer to my friend group or to whatever other setting, to my clients. Right. I can tell, whether this is going to work or not, because there's that motive filter that's going on. But then each language also has a need from others. And this will add into the circumstance you just described, because the mover language need from others is for congruency. So I need to know that your words and actions line up, your motives are pure, but also that you are actually going in a direction that's going to take us all somewhere together.
Absolutely.
A bit like the on-ramp on the interstate. You don't want somebody who doesn't know what they're doing. Accelerate, brake, merge, move off again. You're longing for congruency, and it really frustrates you if you don't get it.
Yes.
And that's part of how you're reading the people, the new ones in the friend group, but also as you get through that kind of assessment process, that's why you've got a few long-term friends. They're the ones who their motives are good, they're going in the same direction, they're on the interstate with you, you're all going the same way at the same speed. And so there's that. It doesn't mean that you're all alike necessarily, it means that there's that congruency. And so all of that comes out of that first language.
Okay. I also feel I would consider myself a self-aware individual.
Yeah.
Strong in self-awareness. And one of my weaknesses that I know for a fact is going back to that I'm thinking more based on what I have as opposed to, I'm not a whimsical dreamer, a thinker, or I do not make decisions predicated upon my emotions. I think in certain scenarios, yes, I have to bend my will to be more emotional in a certain scenario. Let's say a loved one has passed or someone lost a pet, something along those lines. I realize that and I have to bend to that. But in a majority of walks of life that I find myself in a day-to-day, especially in business, I don't see much place for emotion when I'm making these decisions. Mm-hmm. And I think that for me, being able to close that emotional door and make those decisions, I can make sure I'm making decisions that is the best for the most people long-term that are coming along with me.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And even if that involves leaving certain people behind, it means leaving certain people behind. Mm-hmm. It's like with, the instance of, I can't remember, I think it was one of my business ethics classes I took in college. Just a wonderful, useless course I took. And we had an example of, there's a train track, and on one side, the train track splits, and you're standing at a lever, and the train is on course to hit 4 people, and on the other track is 1 person. Yep. If you flip the lever, you yourself flip the lever, the train will change tracks and kill the 1 person as opposed to the 4. And I remember sitting in that classroom, and there seemed to be this debate going on, and everyone was, but if you do it, you're the one doing it. So a lot of people went the route of like, I don't want to be the one responsible. And I remember from the moment the question was asked, I already knew I'm flipping the lever.
Yeah.
There was no thought process whatsoever around it. Now, if you of course, everybody likes to make things complicated and add layers to these questions of like, well, now what if we start talking about let's say the status or level of importance of the individual? Mm-hmm. Now, all of a sudden, we're talking a very different scenario. If we're talking the leader of our group on one track and 4 subordinates on the other, and this is a strong leader that is leading us in a good direction, in that scenario, my mind may be different. Sure. I may sacrifice the 4 for the sake of everyone else and having the leader. So that's kind of, I guess, some of the ways that I think. And yes, in certain scenarios, and I've been told all my life, and I'm self-aware to understand, like, I get that that can be looked at as ruthless. Mm-hmm. But if you think that's ruthless, you should see how I talk to myself.
Sure. Right. Well, that's another facet of the mover language. They come across as harsh to the rest of us, but actually you're harshest with yourself then you are much more harsh with yourself than you are with other people. The setting of high standards isn't just I know best and you will do what I say. No. It's how can I be the very best I can be? But then your second language is the shaper, which is a thinking language. We divide these languages into 3 types of language, so that you've got action languages, the ones who just get on and do something, which is what we've just been describing. Then there's the thinking languages, and then there's the feeling languages. We already touched on the fact that the 2 feeling languages are your lowest in your profile, which all that means is, like you said, when I need to, I have to intentionally, consciously, by act of will or act of action, step into emotion. I can do it, but I don't go there normally. It's available to me, but I pull it out when I need to, kind of like a first aid kit kind of approach, whereas there's other people, and let's continue the analogy, you don't want to, if you go to the doctor's office or the hospital, to have somebody who's just sitting in the waiting room with a first aid kit. You want a bigger equipping in that realm. Yep. And so there are places where the emotive languages are very valuable, just not in where you're at. And that's, I think, is part of how you've ended into, or not ended up, but how you're flourishing in the setting that you're in, as an entrepreneur, as a planner, as your shaper language is all about planning. Both the mover and the shaper have to be careful that they don't leave all the wounded behind them. Because if it's all about the plan and I forget the people, well, then the plan doesn't get done, because, the plan takes people. And I don't see that in you, but shapers, very strong shapers, can often end up, especially if they're leading an organization. It's interesting, the analogy that you use of the 2 train tracks. You've got a strong leader on track 1. Well, all the feeling people are going to switch the lever so that the others get away with it, because now we can get rid of this guy. But you put those 2 together in a standard setting, absent any other factors, you're going to be somebody who can have a plan and act on it, and not be afraid to do what needs to be done. Exactly what you just described. There's your top 2 languages in the analogy you used, in the example you used. And you're self-aware enough that you understand that that's not a one-size-fits-all. I can use this approach to life all the time. It's probably not unless you find a lady who's wired in a very similar way, she's probably not going to appreciate, well, we're going to do this, and I've got this plan, and we're going to climb this mountain, and we're going to beat this. There will need to be other languages in the mix, in that relationship, different from your business relationships with your clients, for example. Or if I was to treat my wife the way that I treat some of my clients. I mentioned that my friend who's a client of mine, who's a high mover, I have to give it to him straight. If I did that with my wife, she'd leave me. Because she's not wired that way. So understanding the differences is what really is the crucial part.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And I know for myself, when it really comes to understanding yourself, the real key follow-up is the self-awareness component.
Absolutely.
If you are not self-aware, you're not going to be even able to start thinking about where you can start bridging gaps with people in communication.
If anything, you're going to be more dangerous to yourself and to others, because another thing about these languages is they've all got predictable distress flares. So if what they need from other people, or their filter questions not answered, this kind of stuff we talked about just now, if that's not happening, then there's very predictable ways that language will go into distress. Right. And sadly, most people, you can identify what their primary languages are by the way they're acting out. Absolutely. And it's not because it's a jerk. It's because there's a need there that's not being met, and it's coming out in predictable ways. And so I always teach groups to say, when you see a distress flare in others in the group, it's an invitation to make a difference. It's an invitation to help, not a cause to push somebody away. Because typically when somebody's, let's carry on with your example. If you're in a setting where there isn't a lot of action and congruency going on, where the filter of what's your motive, you feel like you can't trust anybody, that's going to come out in you eventually, at least. You're a bit more of a controlled kind of guy, so you'd probably hold on to it for longer. But if you weren't as self-aware, it's going to come out as attack, demand, attack, because those are the distress flares in the mover language. So you're going to come out looking like this kind of guy who's always pointing the finger and accusing people and saying it's got to be this way kind of thing. And that's often what we see because people don't understand how they're wired. They haven't got the self-awareness. And so therefore they're not able to get their needs met in healthy ways. They're not able to have their filter question answered because they don't know what it is, all those kinds of things. They don't know what strength they're bringing to any interaction. All of those kinds of things are, I see such a difference in people when I help them see what's going on in themselves, as well as what's going on in somebody else, because it helps them depersonalize. There's always conflicts in any relationship because none of us is identical. So there's always going to be something somewhere along the way where, I get it wrong and you and I have a conflict. Right. But if I understand how to depersonalize that, that also is a very helpful thing to do. So for example, it might be as simple as saying, you know what, I realized that I wasn't honoring you with action in the last time we got together. I was just sitting there talking my head off about something that you didn't have any interest in or wasn't helping you get to where you were going. And I'm really sorry because I recognize that you're a kind of guy who needs me to be doing action with you for our relationship to flourish. Again, that's just speaking mover. But until I get that understanding, I can't see it for what it is. I just think, well, you're offended at me, and now I've just got to make sure I find another friend. Right. And then so for me, my primary language is influencer. So I love making connections with people. I guess that's what makes me an effective coach because I love finding more people to connect with and help. But if that were to happen in our relationship as friends, that's going to hurt me that you don't want to be around me anymore because all I do is sit there and talk. But I can then process that and understand what's happening, what the dynamics are, what to fix, what to change, what to adjust.
I certainly struggle when it comes to to me, it's like, let's talk where talking is due.
Sure.
And especially within my closest circle of friends, we'll sit and we'll talk all night. Mm-hmm. But what's the direction of the conversation? Is it where I thrive is in we're sitting there and we are strategizing or we are planning or we are thinking about new ideas and things like that. I can talk for days on end with my closest friends about those things, about how we're going to conquer the world.
Absolutely. And you probably will because it's this high mover shaper. Innovation is the mover and then strategy is the shaper. You put those two together, you could conquer anything.
I'll get after it then.
Come on.
But when I'm vice versa on the other side of the spectrum, when I'm in a large, let's say a networking setting,
right,
and I'm surrounded by people that I don't necessarily have deep rooted connections with yet. Maybe it's a new chamber event and there's a lot of people in there I don't know. I don't want to sit there and have surface level conversation with a bunch of people that I don't know. Right. In fact, when I go up and talk to someone, it's funny because I come across as a very introverted person in public, but it's quite the contrary. Right. I'm just very decisive on whom and what I'm going to talk about. Mm-hmm. And for me, I'm always looking for signs in people that, that align with what they're saying kind of thing, people I can trust. So I will go up and I may walk up to someone I have never met in my life, shake their hand, introduce myself, and then it's, what do you do for work? What are you working on? Yeah. I always want to know about them. I want to pull from them so that I can, as quickly as possible, reach a conclusion as to whether this individual is A, worth more of my time, B, needs something from me, mm-hmm. because I do genuinely love to find people that need something. Yep. And connect them with the resources or the person that can help them to achieve their goal, because I know that a rising tide raises all ships.
Absolutely, yeah.
But to me, there of course could be some deeply rooted selfish intent in that. I want more strong-willed men in my circle, in my corner, when push comes to shove.
Right.
So I want to find these people, help them, create a connection, create a bond in order to lay the groundwork, if you will, for a relation like that to grow.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that is one of the key things that you bring to that group of men, that you're one of the ones who's doing that, because not all of them would know how to do that or be wired to be drawn to do that. In any group of men, you've always got a range of all of these 7 languages. But what I try and help people particularly if I'm coaching groups, I try and help them see that no one language is better than any other. They're all the best language, just in different places at different times for different people in different ways. And so I've watched you in networking meetings and just see how you follow that process. And I love that you've got the self-awareness to know, I'm not just the introvert who sits at the back and doesn't connect with anybody. You know that you're strategizing. You know that you're assessing motive. You're working out where to invest your energy, your time for the most effect, because you've taken the trouble to understand yourself. And that's a gift that many men don't yet have, to know what I bring and to know what I can offer, so that I can then interact with others with the way of, how can I be most beneficial to you? Or how can I get out of your way if I'm not beneficial to you at the moment? Because both of those are valuable. I find myself doing similar things, but for different reasons. So like I've said, my profile is very different from yours. Your highest language is my lowest language, but our second languages are the same. So I'm planning and strategizing, and I'm very comfortable around other leaders. But I will come to it with, how can I encourage? How can I lift up? How can I bring enthusiasm to this relationship? Because I'm feeling it. I'm not necessarily thinking it, I'm feeling it. So it's a different approach, but a similar result. And that's how the languages all work together. I love it.
And I want to go even a little deeper into that as well, and talk about, these are 2 subjects that, due to my own self-interest, I've been wanting to speak to you about these. The first is going back to, the way that a high mover or an individual like myself pursues networking or meeting other people or being in a social setting. I have always been an avid believer in that if you want to get a point across, or if you want to make something known in a room full of people, you need to embrace body language for what it is. And in my opinion, it is by far the strongest way to get any message or idea across.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It is, and I think, I don't know, I have certainly faced my level of criticism from people that may not understand how I operate. It's very interesting. I think even the third Go Givers networking event that you ever came to, you reached out, you came over to me and had a conversation with me.
Yeah.
And I'm now coming to the realization, obviously, after we've been working together for several months now, it's because you understood, because you saw that and you came to me and communicated to me in my fashion. You came up, you were direct. Hey, I really think we should have a conversation.
Yeah.
I'd love that. Let's do that. And
it took me a while to figure it out, but
did it? Well, because I think, one, it's read. It's not necessarily easy to read when it involves a lot of nonverbal communication and silence. Mm-hmm. But meanwhile, I think that once you come full circle, once someone does develop the understanding of someone like myself, of the body language kind of style of communication, then all of a sudden it's there.
Right.
I think that it's harder to understand message, but once understood, it's much stronger.
Yeah, I think so. And I think some of that is easier for you the way your profile comes out.
Okay.
Because of, we already talked about that filter for the mover of what's your motive. You're always looking at what's the motive and assessing in that way. You're just wired to do that. I'm less wired to do that. That's why it took me a little while to figure it out in terms of coming to talk to you. But you've also got the contemplator language is your third language, but it's still pretty high. It's above 50, which means it's a fluent language for you. And with that, you're always wanting to dig a little deeper. You're always reflecting on what can I learn? It's always asking questions. What's under the surface? You don't accept things on a surface level with that kind of profile. You've got mover, shaper, contemplator, all of those languages in their unique way. Let's not blend them all together like they're all the same. They're not. They're all very different. But you put all three together, you've got 3 times the assess, filter, figure out, get to know on a without necessarily jumping in kind of level. And that comes out in the way you behave in those kinds of meetings. And it stands you in good stead to find the people that you really can add value to and the people you want to include in your circle and the ones that you want to build a connection with. So you don't then waste your time. It would be a waste of your time to be hanging out all the time with people who love to talk, and it doesn't really matter what we talk about, and when we think we've finished talking, we'll go on and talk about something else. Some people flourish in that. You would explode, and I'm kind of somewhere halfway in between. I can go on talking with people. Part of that is in the encouragement of the influencer, which again is a more distant concept for you, the way your profile comes out. But at the same time, my shaper that you would recognize as well, there's got to be a strategy, there's got to be a plan, and it's like a chess game. I'm not going to waste my time moving pawns around because I'm not going to win the game. And so there's an element of strategy in it as well. And so it's understanding those combinations that's really interesting. And each of us is unique in the blend of these 7 languages, but all 7 languages are equally predictable, both in what they bring to the table and what characteristics you'll see, but also in what you'll get if that's not happening, where things start to go wrong.
That's very interesting. Yeah. My second selfishly intended question is, in the past for me, I have something that is very, very important to me. It is a part of my plan, 110%. And that is to be a father, to have children. And I see that as my purpose. I see that as a main reason why I was put on this earth. And I also see the need with all children of all ages for nurturing, especially at a certain age. And I am self-aware enough to know that no matter how much they are my purpose or they are my fulfillment or they are my legacy, I will never be the nurturer I will never be best suited to nurture them, to grow into caring children that I would want them to be, hardworking, dedicated. If they take after me, they're going to drive towards certain things, and I would love to see that level of ambition in, my next of kin. But regardless, there's that nurturing component that I know that I will lack in. I would rather spend my time as a man setting an example for my children as to what it looks like to be there, be present, be dedicated when you are there, but know that I will not always be there because there is a mission at hand, or there is things that a man needs to do to provide and protect one's family. And so I see that and I understand that, and I, for the better part of probably the last 2 years of my life, have really truly understood that and really wanted this and seen this as the vision for my life. And I realize the importance for me to have a significant other, have a life partner where she is quite the opposite of me, where she leans more towards making emotional decisions. And I think it's really, that's just the feminine, more or less, the feminine spirit. And where she's going to be a nurturer and all of these things. Yep. But at the same time, I'm left with the middle ground between getting there and there's life forms for her to nurture. Mm-hmm. And prior to that, I have to create a bond and form a relationship with a woman that probably feels I want her to have those tendencies and that lust to nurture. Mm-hmm. But if I'm the male in her life, she's probably going to feel the need to nurture me. And when I am nurtured or someone tries to show me soft love, things like that, I am suffocated. Mm-hmm. And I know that about myself, and I can be abrasive and I can be these things. So obviously I can be self-aware of that and take a course of action to, when I'm with her, I'm going to communicate more emotionally. Mm-hmm. But what would be your thoughts around how one should pursue that middle ground in a way that you don't tarnish the very thing that you want?
Yep. In any relationship, I see two different scenarios, and the one you just described is the most common, where opposites attract. So your highest language will likely be her lowest, or something similar, and your profiles will be opposites to each other. And that's where the understanding of all 7 languages is vital, because either differences can become obstacles to relationship, or they can become strengths within a relationship. Because you understand yourself enough to know, I want to have children, and children need to be nurtured, and they're not getting nurture from here. So we've got to build nurture into the picture somewhere. However, you're going to have to adapt some of your strongest traits and express them in different ways, taking into account what a nurturer needs, along with the strengths you bring of strategy and action. And so you're self-aware enough to know that. Hopefully you'll find her self-aware enough to understand that too. So when husband and wife are so different, learning what are the significant factors that will actually give life to the other is essential. Then the next thing that happens is when you have children, you'll find that the children come out, they're not identical to either of you. And so then there's even further adaptation needed, because actually I never thought that children could be different from each other until I had children myself. And I have 3 sons who are all very different from each other. And so each of them would have a different preferential first or second language in their life language profile. However, I know that every single person on the planet has at least an element of all 7 languages. And so therefore I know where to go to make the connection in whatever setting it is with each of them. So, with one son, I'm going to be talking more cognitively, just talking about concepts and thoughts and deep, inquisitive, philosophical stuff. With another son, I'm going to be talking plans and metrics and measuring progress by spreadsheets and, success financially and those kinds of things. And then with the third one, I'm going to be talking more in terms of feelings and caring, along with a deep sense of justice. Because I think, and again, my guys haven't actually taken their profiles because it's kind of, you don't want dad to necessarily get the scoop on you, I think. Anyway, although I would, if they happen to listen to this, I wouldn't hold it against you. I would use it to make myself better for you, not worse. But responder mover is an interesting combination. Care very deeply about the individual in front of me, but also care very deeply about justice and action to address justice. And it's an interesting thing when you get 2 languages that have a lot of opposite characteristics in them in your profile, you can experience a degree of internal conflict. So in your profile, less so, but suppose your contemplator was higher and right next to your mover. Actually, my sister-in-law has that in her profile. We looked at hers and she's high mover, also high contemplator.
So she's overthinking all the time.
So probably. She can easily overthink, but also she wants everything. She's always filtering through, does this all add up? But I said, do you often experience a sense of internal conflict where you're arguing with yourself, if you like. Oh yeah, all the time. So again, that little snippet of self-awareness helped her to see, okay, I'm not crazy. This is just the way I'm wired. And actually I can turn that, now I understand it, I can turn it to my advantage, because I've got these two voices that are kind of arguing with each other. Well, I can tell one to hush for a minute while the other one gets a chance, depending on what I need. Do I need to think more deeply, or do I need to really sort of, pick up the baton and run? And she does both very well, except when she feels that conflict of which one do I want to do? So understanding in that way. I'm sorry, we went a long way away from your future children, but
no,
when
you're right on course.
When you have kids, each one needs something different from you. It's knowing how to give them what they need in the moment that is the key that really makes all the difference. Because the thing, for me, my parents didn't know how to give me what I needed because they didn't understand what I needed. It wasn't that they were wonderful people, but very often they didn't understand what I needed in the moment. And so I grew up shriveled, emotionally, philosophically as well, because I was constantly trying to adapt myself to what I thought other people thought I needed. Back to what we said earlier, it's my perception of what your perception of me is that I end up all kind of twisted and boxed in. So I found with my sons that understanding them at least a little helps me to be more valuable to them in our interactions. They're all adults. They've all got their own lives. And actually, interestingly, all of them have partners who are very different from them. But again, understanding them, I think, unless they're not being honest, they actually quite like my wife and I because we relate to them as they are rather than relating to them as we might do, if we didn't know them well, because we've learned to understand different people in different ways. So it's a big step forward to understand the 7 languages in that way, because you need a different language, different people at different times.
Do you see key fundamental similarities and differences between men who take this profile or men who fill out this questionnaire and women? Or does it... I'm very curious as to that.
Interesting. No.
Really?
You can have, so it's not that any of these languages are more in the masculine or more in the feminine. And actually, masculine and feminine are all a bit of a spectrum anyway. You've got some, what we consider to be masculine traits. Some men have far more of them than other men. It doesn't make them less men. I'm thinking of a friend of mine who, he's a great guy. He's a wonderful dad, but I would guess he's probably a high responder contemplator. And contemplator, I could imagine being considered a male trait. That sort of sit in an armchair in a study somewhere with a pipe and a glass of whiskey and leave me alone kind of thing. But on the other hand, I know some women who are very high contemplators, and they spend all their time thinking about thinking. Right. Because they want to know more, Right. I know women who are high movers. So again, it's not a masculine trait, but the way that a woman who, it depends on the whole profile,
right? But
each of us is unique, and so we can't categorize. What I love to say to people is, you're a person, not a profile.
Right.
Okay. So yes, your profile is helpful for self-awareness. If I know someone else's profile, that might help me to know how to relate to them, and it might not. Just depends on all the circumstances of our interaction or whatever we're working together on or whatever it may be. But I don't think it would ever be true. Yeah, no, in my experience, I've seen hundreds of profiles now, just in my own practice. Men and women alike come out with any of the languages high, any of the languages low. It just depends how they're wired.
I'd be very interested to see women's profiles or results, and to have a 50-50 test of women, of maybe single or in relationship women, and mothers.
Mm-hmm.
I would be very interested, because there really does seem to be something that happens when a woman becomes a mother, like that natural, I don't even know what you would call it, but that natural tendency to nurture,
Yep.
to care for. You see it, you see the change, I think, in mothers it's much more prominent than in fathers, I would think, just from purely from my observation.
Right.
I would think,
Well,
as far
here's
as
an interesting
emotional.
thing based on a scientific study of one man,
Mm-hmm.
who's the only man I've studied closely. Everything changes when you become a father as well. And you discover nurturing qualities within you that you had no idea were there. So there's a vast difference between a baby and my baby. Mm. The baby does the same thing, squawks and, ejects fluids of various kinds out of various holes in different places. But there's a whole difference in this is my child versus this is somebody else's child. So although you're right, there is definitely a tendency in the feminine to nurture. There's actually a masculine tendency to nurture as well.
I see.
That's expressed differently, but it's just as vital. And you only get it when it's needed.
That's very interesting.
So when you actually commit yourself to someone, i.e., you enter into that committed relationship with a woman, again, that relationship changes at that point. It's the old sort of figure of speech, that they're different as they go down the aisle from when they come back up the aisle, and it does change because now I've committed, I've put a ring on it.
Yeah.
and now it's different, I'm a firm believer in you marry one and you stick to it. Now, obviously, that's not in any way a down on anybody who's had to go through a divorce or breakup, whatever. Mm-hmm. But the ideal, I think,
I agree,
is there's got to be commitment. Jane and I would not have lasted if we hadn't had that sense of this is it. There is no, I haven't got plan B in my back pocket. Because that gives a strength to the relationship that I wouldn't have if I'm just always looking around for the next best option. Right. And then when you have children, that builds on that strength of that man and woman relationship. It's going to take everything that both of you have got to get through it. Quite honestly, I'm not trying to put you off. I totally recommend it.
Well,
but
a couple sentences ago, you just told me I have a chance to be a nurturing father. So
absolutely, yes. And you'll also discover that you're going to need all of her strength as well as all of your strength to get through this. Mm-hmm. and that's the way it goes. And that brings us full circle, if you like, because actually the only way you get through it is by other people saying you will get through this. By other men who've gone there ahead of you, being there, seeing the best in you, calling it out from you, supporting you, encouraging you, taking action with you, helping you have a strategy that's going to work because of their experience, bringing their resources to the table for you, for your family. That's what happened for us. Not just our parents who did the best they could, but also a whole group of others around us who were at least half a step ahead. And it takes a village. It's the old quote, but it's true. But again, this is where communication is so vital, because unless you know how to leverage all of that and build those bridges, you lose out on that. And that's why so much of our society is struggling today. We've lost out on the ability to create community by making connections. And it's tragic. And to be really honest, that's what gets me up in the morning. I can't change society, but I can at least change individual relationships.
Changing individual relationships is how you change society.
Absolutely.
It all starts in the community.
Yep.
It starts in the individual.
It's got to start.
And then the individuals.
It's got to start here, then it goes there. And after that, the people around us get the benefit too.
Well, maybe for you here, but for me here.
Well, okay. True point. Yep. Yes. Yep.
Absolutely. Well, that I think is very powerful. I think that what it is that you do, I mean, I'm working with you as a client. I certainly believe in you and what you're doing. Cool. And I think that it's a very positive message that you're spreading about communication when it comes to the way that you're educating others on the different styles of communication. And, you know, someone in your position with a coaching business such as yours, communication coaching, could very easily make it all about the tools, the profiles, the features that come with working with you. But you very much go to, that's what I respect so much about you, and why I have a lot of trust for you, is because you go to the result, the desired result, and you talk about that. And maybe you've been talking to me like that because you know I'll receive it that way well. But I think you are very well spoken, and you have a very positive message that you're trying to spread. You are trying to make an impact, and I certainly hold you at high regard and have a lot of respect for that.
Thank you. I receive that. And yeah, I might say it differently to somebody else if their profile was very different from yours, but the goal's still the same. I want you to be the best you can be. And if I can help, that's what I'm here for. That's what I'm up for.
Well, for those who would like to seek that help, where can people find out more information about you, what it is that you offer, and the communication coaching?
Certainly, yeah. I have a website, markburlinson.com, just very simple, just my name. And on that website, you can actually click the button to discover your profile, and it'll take you through all the questions and ask for your credit card at the end and give you your own personalized report. But you can also just send me a message from there, or you can schedule an appointment. I do the first half hour of any interaction for free, so people can just click on and schedule a free half hour, get started, and then I try and price everything as cheap as I can because I don't want anybody to miss out. And what I say is that the value of what I'm giving you is much more than the price I'm charging you. But if the price is an obstacle, tell me so that we can work something out. So I do packages of 4 sessions to help people unpack their profiles. But also if people want to use this with relationships or families or even in business, I also do workshops and stuff like that. So all sit down together, learn the characteristics of all the languages. Now we can get along much more easily. Beautiful.
And if I can give any testimony to what you do, we conversate because of the fact that we have the working relationship together now, working on some of your social media marketing and things like that.
Right.
But I've had enough I've got a profile myself, had a conversation with you about it. You broke it down to me. We've conversated today a lot about it, but it truly has. I am a very self-aware person, so is the profile necessarily as necessary or critical as it may be for someone that's less self-aware? Maybe, maybe not, but I have found so much utility in being able to derive questions to you from the profile. I think it offers a fantastic starting point for anyone that is trying to further understand themselves, the way that they communicate, and how to communicate better with others. So thank you, first and foremost. And I would very much recommend your service.
Thank you.
All right, Mark. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
It's been fun.
We appreciate it. And ladies and gents, we will catch you all in the next episode.